That's very easy also for me. The message of grief, and this is the thing that came to my mind after reading and hearing these stories. And maybe the message of hope, but I'm still not really sure about this. I would like to invite quite special people on the stage. The people who I would call survivors, because they survived or witnessed the greatest tragedies that people can witness in their lives. I don't want to really to tell their stories. They will tell their stories by themselves. But the short introduction to this first part. This is November 2013, and the tropical cyclone Hayat, or also called Yolanda, which was the cyclone of the highest, 5th grade, is hitting to the Philippines. It was a great tropical cyclone during which the average speed of wind increased over 300 kilometers per hour. The eye of the cyclone hit the city of Tacloban and the middle part of Philippines. It appeared to be really deadly in its effects, and it went to the history of the science as the strongest storm that ever hit the land coming from the ocean. And the number of confirmed casualties was more than 6,300, and many thousands of other people just missed without any trace. The city of Tacloban has been destroyed in 80%, and for some time completely cut it from the world. And the numbers themselves doesn't really tell too much. But I would like all of us, for a moment, to hear the story of a very special person who survived that moment and witnessed that moment with her own eyes, to tell the story in a very special way. And let me introduce and let me invite our guest from Philippines, Joanna Sustento.
Hello. Hi. I'm not sure if I can... Oh my God. Okay. Hi, I'm Joanna Sustento from the Philippines, from Tacloban. First, I'd like to thank all of you for lending your immortal listening powers, hopefully, and for giving me this chance to share the story of our community in such a global platform. So to start, I would like all of you to, let's do like a little, let's do something different. I'd like all of you to close your eyes, just relax. And I would like you to imagine this one morning, I wake up to the music of the Beatles playing on the stereo. My 60-year-old parents are avid fans, especially my mom, Thelma. I go out of my room to the dining table and find my father, Cesar, taking a sip of his morning coffee as he discusses current events with my older brother, Julius. Being lawyers, their discussion eventually turns into a debate, and the only person who can pacify the situation is my nephew, Taryn, who is calmly eating his breakfast, eggs, banana, and sweet potato dipped in peanut butter, specially prepared by his dad, my eldest brother, Jonas. I go to the kitchen and find my mom cooking champorado. So champorado is rice mixed with cocoa. My mom was dancing to the music of the Beatles. She glances at me with her wonderful smile and says, "Good morning, baby." Yes, at 22 years old, I am still her baby. I embrace her from behind and dance with her as my sister-in-law, Geo, feeds me French toast that she's prepared. It was a typical, happy Thursday morning for our family. Now I want you to imagine this. Striving to surface the water as debris were blocking my head, I felt like I was being spun inside a washing machine. I could no longer breathe, and I seriously thought I was going to die. Not knowing what to do, I told myself, if that was the day I was going to my watery grave, then so be it. Never in my life have I talked to God with deep remorse and in complete surrender. However, death decided to postpone. I was given another chance to live. Using my head, I pushed the debris away until I was able to surface. As soon as I saw my mother, I immediately drifted towards her, grabbed her arms, and tried to lift half of her body so she could hold on to the wood I was using to stay afloat. But when my hand slipped from her arms to her fingers, her body splashed into the water, and there was no sign of her struggling to survive. My mom was gone. I found myself being swept away by the 15-feet-high storm surge to the steel frames of a water tank as my mother died in my arms. It was then when hypothetical questions turned to reality. I had to make a decision. Am I going to hold on to my mom's lifeless body and die with her? Or should I let her go and save myself? I truly considered letting myself drown in the deluge. Seeing my family in complete desperation was agonizing for me. And what's worse is that I couldn't do anything to save them. I had no reason to live anymore. Maybe that's what happens when you see your loved ones being taken away from you one by one, and all you can do is watch. However, something was telling me that there must be a reason why I survived. And I'm sure my parents would want me to live and find out what the reason is. When a person dies, the last sense to vanish is the sense of hearing. So with all the love that I had, I asked for my mom's forgiveness for everything I did that hurt her. I thanked her for being the strong woman that she is, and for everything she has done for me and our family. I told her I loved her again and again. I embraced and kissed her for the last time. And that was it. I let her go, and I never looked back. It was already 9 a.m. when I was able to seek refuge on the nearby building. Few hours after the devastation, the whole world, regardless of time zones and distance, had its eyes on the Philippines. All of a sudden, people knew about Tacloban. Over thousands of people were reported dead, injured, and missing. 5 of those are my parents, my eldest brother, my sister-in-law, and my 3-year-old nephew, leaving only me and my older brother as survivors. When the wind and rain had stopped, when the surge had receded, when the typhoon had died down and left our region in catastrophic ruins, everyone thought the storm was over. Little did we know that the real struggle for those who were left behind was just about to begin. As my brother and I walked the streets of Tacloban, I looked at the city's mountain range. I was surprised to see that the abundant greenery was now brown and dull. Not a single tree survived the storm. Half the roads were blocked with piles of debris. The stench of death filled the humid air. Cadavers of humans and animals surrounded the city, and people looking like zombies were all over the streets, walking with no clear direction. It was as if a sheet of cloth was forcibly pulled from underneath us and left the whole region devastated. All I wanted was to go home. All I wanted was to feel the comfort and security of my family. But where do you go when your home has been washed away? What do you do when your strongest support system, your family, whom you love the most, is gone? Who do you hold on to? How do you move forward when the future seems to be a blur? November 8, 2013 was the day the sea grew hungry and with all its power took everything away from us and left us with nothing but questions. Questions we are forced to face and carry with us every day. Questions we had no idea how to answer. Questions we could never imagine ourselves to ask in this lifetime. And questions that may never even exist if only life had been more fair, but it isn't. A year after the onslaught of Super Typhoon Haiyan, we were anticipating another super typhoon. And I thought, is this it? Is this all we can do? To wait for another super typhoon to happen? Are we just going to record the casualties, the injured, the missing? Are we just going to wait for relief and aid from foreign countries every time we are met with catastrophes? Are we just going to rebuild and rehabilitate every time super typhoons such as Haiyan wreck our homes, buildings, and livelihood? That's when I realized that I am done waiting. Because I do not want to see my whole world fall apart right before my eyes once again. And I could never bring myself to think about my children and my children's children bear the agony and trauma of what my family experienced. Homes, buildings, and livelihood can always be rebuilt. But no amount of money can ever bring back the thousands of lives and the emotional turmoil caused by these dreaded calamities. We have already survived the worst. It is time we do more than just adapt and endure. For the longest time, climate change has always been about theoretical studies and scientific researches. But when Haiyan spread its fury and we were stripped of all that we had and everything that we were, it made us realize that the long-standing issue of climate change poses a major threat and has a price to pay, and it is not a small one. Climate change is not just statistics and numbers. It is already about us, the people. The climate crisis is as real as a father who has worked all his life to provide for his family, only to wake up one day and realize his livelihood has been torn apart. It is as real as a mother bearing the agony of looking for her missing husband all day and sleeping beside the dead bodies of her children at night. It is as real as a child who is looking forward to an education only to find out his school is damaged and he cannot study anymore. The climate crisis is as real as the thousands of lives, the thousands of families who lost their homes and livelihood, who until today are living in makeshift homes, struggling to make ends meet, with little to no food and clean water. It is as real as the thousands of victims who perished. And let me just say that the official death toll that is released by our government is 6,300. But I am angered by that statement because there are more than 10,000 people who died in my own community. And for our national government to discount the death toll is an insult. It is as real as the thousands of survivors who lost their families, and with it, their dreams and ambitions. We in the Philippines, we are a community living in a paradox because we are the ones who are least responsible for climate change, but we are the ones who are gravely affected by its impacts. We do not have the luxury to deny and debate about it because we are too busy and frankly too exhausted to survive one catastrophe after another. When Typhoon Haiyan struck, our small city of Tacloban became known as Ground Zero, the city that became the graveyard of its own people. But we strongly refuse to be known as just hapless victims of typhoons. We are a people who have survived and decided that it is no longer enough to adapt and endure. We have finally learned to fight for our lives and the lives of our future generations. We are a community willing to stand in the front lines of tackling climate change because we believe that we have the greatest weapon to change the system. We have the greatest weapon to change the global mindset. We have a weapon that speaks to the hearts of many, one that transcends international borders, and that is through the power of storytelling. Our experience as a community 5 years ago is what drives us to continue telling our stories. It became a way for us to mourn, to remember, and to heal. But now our stories have transformed as a way for us to fight because we have realized that living a safe, decent, and dignified life is not a privilege. It is a human right. It has been my mission to share the story of our community because we are not mere statistics. Like you and the world leaders in there discussing our future, we have dreams and ambitions. We have families whom we love so dearly. We have advocacies we want to pass on to our future children. And whenever extreme weather events happen, we lose all of that. In the past few weeks that I've been staying here in Poland and in the past few days that I have walked with my fellow pilgrims over there, it has been a spiritual journey for me. Because these courageous people and the people I have marched with yesterday and the people here today reminded me that the Philippines will never be alone in this fight. Because we are a people who will constantly choose to resist. We should resist a future where tragedy seemed to be the new normal. We should resist a life that hinders us from dreaming big, for fear that these dreams will be just a stagnant reminder of a future we will never have. We should resist a life that is dependent on drilling and digging the earth's core for filth. While people in vulnerable communities like the Philippines are forced to be the sacrificial lambs. Protecting human rights from the impacts of climate change may look like a David and Goliath battle. One can just easily back down. But if you come from a place like Tacloban, where you've witnessed people being pushed to their limits, yet still manage to defy the impossible every single day, it is very difficult to find an excuse to give up. To the world, November 8, 2013 was the day Super Typhoon Haiyan ravaged the Philippines and left it in ruins. But to us, it will always be the day that the strongest storm in human history met the strongest people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And I think this is the moment for, after this very personal story, to talk a little bit not only about the past, but also about the future. Please. They say heartache and grief fades with time. They say that time heals. But does it really?
Time heals. No. Well, in my case, I feel like I've already accepted that I will never be able to forget what happened, and I don't want to forget what happened. I've just learned to live with it. And with the purpose that I have found, with the sense of purpose that I have found from what I've gone through, I guess it makes things easier to accept, maybe. Yeah.
It might be a very difficult question, and I have to admit that this is a really difficult question for me, but how after the Haiyan, it was possible for you, but also I think for other people to find the strength to work, to act. I mean, the grief can be kind of night, kind of black cloud that surrounds your heart and your thoughts. How is it possible to break through? How is it possible to not give yourself to this darkness that is taking the strength away?
When we talk about grief or the grieving, because grieving is a process, and it's a kind of process it's a kind of process you go through every day. And even right now, 5 years after the tragedy, I am still going through that process. But how do I manage to get strength? I'm very thankful that I have been, ever since, I've always been surrounded with love from my older brother, the rest of my relatives, my friends, the people that I share, the people that I met through my climate justice journey, especially the new people that I met during the climate pilgrimage. I get strength from those kinds of people who will always remind me that I am not alone. And I guess what's really important is for people to find out what your core is, your why, so that you'll be able to have something to hold on to when things don't seem to make sense.
I really liked something that I found when I was searching for informations. To understand what really happens in Philippines those days, 5 years ago. And I found also your words, which I'm not sure if I would be able to tell that kind of words. You said one day, Haiyan may have changed our lives, transformed our principles and our priorities, but we needed that change. And just like a caterpillar endures painful process to become a butterfly, we have to know that embracing our own metamorphosis can be extreme, but definitely worth the pain. Embracing our own metamorphosis, it's really hard for me to call that experience metamorphosis. But was it metamorphosis? And what is it possible to treat this kind of extreme experience as a worthwhile change? Your inner change.
In my case, because of what happened 5 years ago was a life-changing event. And I choose to say that it transformed me in a better way. It was that, because if it weren't for Haiyan, I wouldn't even be here. I won't even have the advocacy for climate justice. I don't think I would be thinking of my community, of working for my community. I wouldn't think of myself as someone who could contribute to change. And why I said that typhoon may have transformed our principles, altered our priorities. I said that we needed that change. And yes, for me, yes, we do. We needed that change because, as painful as it sounds, after Typhoon Haiyan, the talks about climate change just became widespread. It just exploded. And it's really painful to think that the world waited to lose more than 10,000 lives so that climate change will be discussed. And until now, they're still discussing, and I don't even know if they're really doing something about it. And that's always my question. How many more lives will it take for our world leaders to really commit? Are they still waiting for another catastrophe to happen? Is Europe waiting for a super typhoon to ravage the whole continent? Is US waiting as well?
I remember you saying that like climate change is probably the biggest injustice in the human history, and we need to go directly to those who are causing that injustice. And I remember also seeing the picture, pretty interesting one, somewhere deep in the among the articles about Haiyan, the people from Philippines walking arm by arm in a kind of demonstration. And that was a climate demonstration, and they carried the the banners with the crossed logos of oil companies, and yeah, in their opinion, that was the right address. The companies that are making their business, which caused the climate change, the tragedies that we experience right now. But we talk for quite a long time about climate change, but it's quite new to talk about climate justice. What is climate justice? How you describe, how you understand that term?
Personally, climate justice, the core message of climate justice is about seeking accountability for the human rights violations resulting from climate change. And when we say we are seeking for accountability, we are demanding justice from those who are most responsible, from the fossil fuel companies who have contributed most to climate change. And in the Philippines, there is actually a climate change and human rights petition filed by typhoon survivors, fisherfolk, farmers, and environmental organizations. They filed a petition to the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines to investigate 47 fossil fuel companies for their responsibility to climate change. Because in the Philippines, when we talk about climate change, it's not just warming oceans, melting polar ice caps in the Arctic. It's not just sea level rise. We talk about losing homes, losing livelihoods, losing families, friends. When we talk about climate change, we lose everything we've ever loved, we've worked hard for. And in the Philippines, we prove that climate change is not just an environmental issue. It's not something political or economical. It is a human rights issue.
But I still remember news from like a few weeks or a few months ago where, as far as I remember, in Netherlands, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a sentence made by the court that the government of the country is not doing enough for the climate, against the climate change. But is it possible, like, what is the status of the commissioner in Philippines? Does it have any legal power to keep those who are responsible for that paying back to the victims?
So right now we are on our way to our fifth public hearings. Yes, fifth public hearings, parallel to the Human Rights Day. And so far, the companies haven't showed up. So it's not. It is to investigate their. It is to investigate their responsibility. These companies like Shell, Chevron, BP, ExxonMobil, Lukoil, and Suncor. And let's say if this case, this case will actually be a good start, would open discussions to our policymakers to really think about integrating into their policies about the risks of climate change. The risks of these companies to our climate if they continue with their business as usual.
I know it might be a hard question, and I feel really strange and embarrassed to ask this question in this place and this time, but we are in front of the climate conference place. Katowice are the 24th climate conference in the history. After 24 conferences, is it still possible to be an optimistic?
So COP24, they started negotiating when I was 3 years old. Am I allowed to be honest? Please. Okay. So am I feeling optimistic about the discussions inside the COP24? Okay, so last night I read that, I read an article last night about some countries just blatantly dismissing the IPCC report. And I couldn't go to sleep because of that. As someone who has been directly impacted by climate change and who has lost everything, it is a great insult that these world leaders who are supposed to have the power, who have the influence and who are supposed to make the right decisions. It is like a slap on my community's face that they are dismissing that fact. I feel very sometimes, well, every day, there's always a feeling of hopelessness because of the different realities that we face. A feeling of hopelessness, frustration, anger. I'm very angry that these people have known of the consequences that would happen if they continue with their business practices. I am very angry of the fact that our world leaders seem to be just tolerant of them just because it isn't happening in their own backyards. And frankly, I am very angry of the fact that the talks about climate change exploded when Typhoon Haiyan happened, when thousands of lives were lost, when the US experienced a series of hurricanes and wildfires. This year, the US experienced those kinds of catastrophic events. And when I read about that, it's very disheartening that whenever catastrophes happen in the US, it seems like the world is so alarmed by it. But whenever catastrophes happen in the Philippines, in the Pacific Islands, in Africa, in all other vulnerable nations, it seems like the world doesn't care about it. And I really want to ask them to their faces, how many more lives will it take for you to take action? But even if every day I feel hopeless, it's also every day that I just keep on gathering the strength and courage that I could from the people that I meet, with whom I share the same advocacies, people from all over the world who have so much purpose in their lives, who have so much fight in them. Because these people are the ones who remind me that if we work together, if we pursue what is significant, if we pursue the significant purpose that we have in our lives, they wouldn't even matter. And I read what the Swedish teen, Greta, she said that you have no, something along the lines of whether you like it or not, change is coming. And it's true. Because the power is in the people. The power is in our stories. The power is in our hearts, in our minds, in our souls. And if we, with that collective strength that we have, although we come from different cultures, we believe different gods, we speak different languages, all of us just, like, the core of what we want is to protect our families, to protect our homes, so that we can still pursue our dreams. So I guess it's like hopelessness and hopeful, but still hopeful. I will always choose to stay hopeful at the end of every day.
Thank you very much. Just let us 3 minutes of break and silence after that, and we will be back with the next guest.